Alright, hello. This is gonna be the fourth and final take that I'm doing on this video because objectively I am tired and I just want the video to come out already. This video is gonna be quite long, so I suggest you either having it on the background or skipping to the point you like, or simply downloading the document in the description that I'm gonna talk about and take a peep for it yourself and share your thoughts in the comments. All of these are valid choices if you want to do that. But on this video, I'm gonna be explaining the document itself, and I am gonna do the best of my capabilities to reason with you on why I think this Warframe, first of all, needs to be changed and reworked completely, and second of all, why the changes that I have thought of are good and how they interact with each other, like abilities, helmets, everything. So let's get right to it. The document itself, I'm gonna switch to display. It's this one. So this one right here, you can see all my text documents up there for like upcoming videos, everything. And overall, this is a video I wanted to do for like a week now, but I haven't managed to record it well. So I'll just do a YOLO recording or whatever happens. So I think that's gonna be the best plan of attack. So we're gonna take a look at a small number of Warframes. We have Ivara, Valkyr, Chroma, Oberon, Inaros, and Banshee. Those 6 Warframes I have done a proposed rework. I'm not a game designer myself, and I don't know anything about game design. So first of all, some of the numbers might be completely overtuned, which I think that will be quite obvious on some abilities that you might think it's overtuned. Maybe it's correct, I'm not really sure. The point I want to get through the document and through the supposed reworks that I want to do is basically give ideas, and so how good these Warframes can potentially be if they do get reworked compared to what they are today. So without further ado, let's start with Ivara. So, current version of Ivara in the game is quite slow. It is the main issue and why I think she needs a rework the most. She isn't really particularly bad. She has her uses, she's very niche, but she's not good for every mission, which is problem number 1. She is slow and methodical as opposed to the fast-paced gameplay that we have nowadays, and slow and methodical has died in Warframe quite a few years back. And she doesn't have almost any room for team play aside from her first ability, Empowered Quiver, and the arrows there. So, you know, overall, I think this is an amazing choice of a Warframe to get reworked, and I think that will do only good for her if we actually took time to rework some of the Warframes listed here and actually took a look at them. So let's start with Ivara. Current passive of Ivara increases her radar range, and I don't think that fits in the game anymore. So new passive I did, Ivara deals 3 times more damage to unaware enemies. So in case you don't know, in Warframe we have stealth multiplier, which is 3 times stronger. With this it would be 2100%, because the stealth multiplier in Warframe is currently 700% of your damage multiplicatively. So, you know, with the 3 times stealth multiplier, that's 2100 times 2100%, sorry, stealth multiplier, which is really good. Obviously, old passive doesn't stay. It doesn't fit in the game anymore. You have primed animal instinct, you don't need it anymore. Then you have first ability, Illuminating Quiver. Ivara chooses between 4 arrows to shoot from her Artemis bow. So this is still the same. It has a bit of passive going on with Artemis bow, which is why I stated that she throws it from there. And we have Entangle Arrow. Ivara places a cord on the target location, activating when detecting enemies within 10 meters. The cord grabs and pulls all enemies to its center, knocking them down for 5 seconds, and up to 5 enemies can be grabbed at once, scaling with ability strength. So 5 enemies at base and then scaling with ability strength to as many enemies as possible. So to showcase this, I think the best plan to showcase this would be through Woban, and I cannot showcase it on Eximus enemies, I'm sorry. So, if we have enemies here, we have Tether Coil, his second ability, the first part. You hold it, and when it detects enemies, you see it grabs 2 of them. The Tether Coil currently only has 2 enemies at once, so this would work exactly the same as Tether Coil, but instead of 2 enemies, it would grab 5 and upwards. So, sounds pretty good. Good. Very simple. Stun arrow. Ivara stuns all enemies within 10 meters of the arrow's impact, opening them to headshots for 5 seconds. So opening them to headshot, what does this mean? So have you seen how Haru's first ability kinda makes the enemies open their hands? So if we use Haru's one, right? You see how they open their hands like that and their hairs are exposed? That's kind of what I mean. Opens them to headshots. So whenever you see opening enemies to headshots, that's exactly what I'm gonna mean. So nothing to see here, just easy headshots, easy thing to get headshot, just like Haru's first ability, but without the as much utility as Haru's first ability, and also provides a small CC to Ivara in order to do defense missions and whatnot. So pretty good. Noise arrow stays, and now enemies affected by it will now run towards the area of the noise. Previously, enemies affected by noise arrow only walk to the area of the noise, and that could do some synergies, but it wasn't very efficient. Then we have dash wire arrow, same as now, but the crit damage augment is built in case you don't know. If we are playing Ivara currently, we have the amazing augment of Empowered Quiver, which has changed obviously, but on the dash wire it grants us 100% critical damage. So when we put the dash wire down, this will stay like this, and you jump on it, you have 423% crit damage on this build, so obviously your damage goes pretty nuts. So that stays, but the augment is now built in, so you don't need it if you want to do that. And then final passive, shooting the arrows while Artemis Bow is active, also makes the arrows explode and adds 20% base critical chance to Artemis Bow. So we're gonna see how Artemis Bow looks like, and you're gonna see how that works in a bit, but just know that this exists. Now, we have normal range and duration scaling, normal strength scaling on the cord arrow, or the entangle arrow. And then we have the augment, Empowered Quiver again, which I thought it was kind of weird that it only worked on 2 of the arrows, so I made it work on all 4 of the arrows. Now, entangle arrow, enemies grabbed are armor stripped. Stun arrow, enemies affected are slapped instead. Now, armor stripped can also be, by the way, like reduce their armor by 60%, 70%, so you'd have to build strength in order to armor strip them fully. That's kind of what I mean. Then we have Stun arrow, enemies affected are slapped instead, so this makes it work with a passive, so they take the 2100% more damage that we talked about, and it also makes it so that Ivara doesn't actually lose the sleep arrow, it just moved on to another ability, and the augment itself. And then we have noise arrow, enemies affected take 50% more damage, which works with Bane. So this works perfectly with a weapon like Purgator 1. So Purgator 1, in case you don't know, when you headshot an enemy and they die from it, the enemy violently explodes in a gas proc. So you see how this guy is taking like 234,000 damage? So a weapon like this and then noise arrow, so enemies are pulled to the gas proc, and the gas proc starts hitting them and absolutely destroying them on its own. So that is the idea behind this this augment and why that would work, and that would be very good for some niche solo Ivara builds. And then we have Dash Wire Arrow. Users on the Dash Wire are immune to status effects. So the status effect immunity before was on the augment again, but it was on Cloak Arrow. So now on the Dash Wire, if you're using the augment, you're getting crit damage and status effect immunity. Pretty good, especially for a team environment, solo survival mission, or even team environment survival mission. It is something that the team would really love to have, because they don't need to go prime sure-footed, they don't really need to care about toxin procs and all that, and it's generally a really good thing to have. Then we have Helmet version. The Helmet version, you tap to use Entangle Arrow and hold to use Stun Arrow, and I think currently it's tap to use Noise Arrow and hold to use Cloak Arrow, if I remember correctly. Something like that. It's good, niche. Both of the versions that we're doing are both cool niche things, but you know, obviously Illuminating Quiver, quite a big buff compared to Quiver as we have right now. Then the second ability is changed completely. Now it's called Multi-Shot, and I think the only thing that I would keep the same in this ability to Navigator would be the animation. So currently, when you use Navigator, you have this animation. Then you can shoot and you control the projectile. Okay, cool. So now you have the same thing, But no, Ivara's next projectile weapon attack gains 600% multi-shot and shoots extra projectile in a wide horizontal arc from left to right. Now, what do I mean by this? A wide horizontal arc from left to right. Have you used the Cernos Prime? Well, this thing has innate multi-shot and it shoots the arrows like this. So you see how you go from here to here? That's exactly what I mean. This scales with ability strength. So the multi-shot here scales with ability strength, while the arc range scales with range until 70 degrees. So the more range you have, the larger the arc will be. 70 degrees, it would be from like there to there. So quite a big arc. If you have a one-shot wonder weapon or an AoE weapon, you would love this ability and how to use it. Pretty simple, very effective, because 50 energy is only for one shot, just like the navigators, so that makes it kind of balanced, even though the multi-shot can be very, very high. And then that's that. But this is only for Ivara. And then we have team-wide barrage. All allies gain the effects of multi-shot at 50% effectiveness for one shot in affinity range. Now, this could be on a normal range and you could mod for it, but I think affinity range is way, way better, because on a build that you want to build for that multi-shot augment, you're probably running something like this. So you would want to use 34% range for having the max narrow-minded to keep the prowl activation forever. And you will see why when I move to prowl, but I think having affinity range, just like on Revenant's Mesmer Shield, it's gonna be way more healthy for her. Sorry, I'm coughing a lot, my bad. Third ability, Prowl. Doesn't remove the ability if Ivara uses parkour movement anymore and increases parkour velocity by 20% while active. So, when Ivara uses Prowl currently, she moves in this speed. If she sprints, she loses it. If she slides, she loses it. And if she bullet jumps, she also loses it. She doesn't lose it if she rolls, she doesn't lose it if she double jump, wall dash, do all this. You don't lose it, so there is still some kind of niche movement that you can do to be fast, but you're generally slow while doing it. Now, if you're activating it, you increase parkour velocity, and first of all, you don't lose it when you sprint, and sprinting has no penalty. Now, instead, parkour now gives the ability 5 times the original energy drain for the duration of the parkour. Wall climbing and wall latching is excluded. So, this means that when you're parkouring, when you're like, bullet jumping, sliding, anything, even rolling, now rolling is included into this, the energy drain of the ability is 5 times stronger. Now, is this a big issue for her? I wouldn't say so, because look at this. The build I'm using right now, the drain per second is 0.34 a second. So if we're having a 5 times stronger drain, that's still a 1.7 drain per second. 1.7 energy per second is not a lot, and you're probably gonna be done with your mission by the time your ability is out. In case you're running out of energy, you can use the augment, the regenerative prowl. Killing enemies while in prowl has a 10% chance for enemies to drop a universal orb, 50% on headshot. So this is 10% chance if you kill enemies in general, but if you kill enemies on a headshot, you get to 50%. This can be, for lack of a better word, it can also be on weak point hit, but I just write headshot. So, and then obviously I write universal orb, so you realize that's an energy orb plus a health orb at the same time. So running this plus equilibrium equals kinda infinite energy, and you're good to go. Then we have Artemis Bow finally, which once again stays the same, and it says works exactly the same as current concentrated arrow augment, but the base damage is increased by 100. So current version of concentrated arrow, especially after the buffs with Tekrot Encore to the exalted weapons, has become an insane augment. So if we go here, and we actually use it, the first shot that we're gonna do is gonna do this, and then the second shot will have a lot of sacks and longbow sharpshot. So it does this. 1.2 million bleed procs pretty casually. And this happens for every headshot that you do. Not bad. And for some reason, because Ivara is broken, you get Purgator's passive working. Don't ask me why. But Purgator's Purgator's gas procs can also work with this, so, you know, it's a double trouble type of thing. Pretty good. Pretty good. So, you know, base damage increased by 100, this would make the bleed proc even better, and now body shots also give the arrow explosions at 30% of the original range. So what concentrated arrow actually does is it removes the multi-shot from Artemis bow, it gives you one single arrow that has 50% extra crit chance on headshots and explodes in a 7 meter radius. So the explosion on max range build right now that I'm using is 19.6 meters, so with 30% of that we would go at around 6.8 or 6.9 meters. Very nice. So, you know, you're still pretty fine on doing this, so body shots basically lose you the crit chance. I can also make it so that body shots lose you the guaranteed impact proc, so internal bleeding doesn't work, but I think that would harm it more than give it a buff. So yeah, and that would be the end of it. But you know, you're like, but I like the wide arc multi-shot, you know, Artemis bow that I already have. Multi-shot is an ability now. You see where I'm going with this? I'm not removing part from Ivara's kit, except for Navigator, which is dated as hell. I'm just adding buffs to all the other useful abilities that you were already using, and just making them flat out better than they already were. So overall, this is all a massive buff. Finally, the Augment Hail of Arrows. Use the alt fire to use 25 energy, which scales with efficiency, and place a field of 10 meters above enemies in an area that constantly shoots arrows below the area. These arrows have extra 40% innate corrosive damage, explode, but had 100 total base damage, 100% status chance, and 0% crit chance. So, to think how this works, this would be kinda like Tempest Barrage, but unlike Tempest Barrage, this has corrosive, the IPS damages, whatever you mod it for, and it has 100% base status chance. Which means that as a primer, and even as a kill weapon with hit inherit, this could become cracked as hell, even at 100 base damage. Obviously, for each of these reworks, you know, you guys tell me in the comments what you think about them, and you know, if you like it, what you would change, what you don't like, what you think, or a suggestion to a change. I absolutely love it, and you can also suggest a Warframe that if you like me doing something like this, you can also suggest a Warframe that you think personally needs to get reworked, and I will take a look at it. And yeah, now moving on to the next rework, we have Valkyr. So Valkyr currently is one of the Warframes that I think is in a very weak spot, and I talked about it on one of my videos about the new exalted melee weapons, where Valkyr herself didn't really get any special or specific buffs, so her talents remained pretty lackluster, and it's mainly due to her heavy attack being, you know, pretty inconsistent, and the only good combo out of all of her combos, as you see, they're all 100%, being the slide attack, which is 300%. So people are kind of coping by saying, oh, just slide attack and you're fine, but you know, you can't just slide attack all the time and just say it's good. Like, you either need to use a macro to make it not fucking destroy your hand, literally, or you just need to cope with the fact that, oh, I'm just gonna use whatever is good, and I'm just gonna ignore the rest of it that is bad, which is not a way to do when you're playing Warframe. So, let's look at her directly. So passive, currently the passive is you avoid hard landings, and you get up a bit faster. Amazing. Top tier passive. Anyway. Valkyr gains 60% parkour velocity and 100% extra armor after getting a melee kill, which is refreshable but not stackable. This means that if you get a melee kill, you get a buff that, let's say this lasts 10 seconds. I haven't decided on duration yet. Let's say this lasts 10 seconds, okay? That's great. For 10 seconds you have 60% parkour velocity and 100% extra armor. You get another melee kill within those 10 seconds, well, it refreshes the buffs for like, you know, you refresh the buff, get the 10-second timer again, but you cannot stack it and gain like 120% parkour velocity and 200% extra armor. I think that's pretty understandable. Then we have the first ability, Hysterical Assault. Valkyr leaps to an enemy with her talents up to 20 meters away, dealing 1000% finisher damage and applying 3 random status effects to the enemy, which is already really, really cool. 1000% finisher damage. You know, it's a single enemy, but it can do a lot, definitely. Plus 3 random status effects. If one of them decides to be blast, then you're looking at tons of damage to surrounding enemies. Now, enemies up to 8 meters around the targets are affected by a new type of status effect called Traumatize. Feared, slowly walking backwards while aiming at Valkyr for 5 seconds. Duration range scaling, sorry. So, Traumatize. This, if you haven't seen the Valkyr Prime Access trailer, this has a really, really close scenario of how that would look. So, let me show you how that looks. Not Access. Trailer, there we go. This is one of my favorite Warframe trailers, by the way, not gonna lie. So, it's here, yeah. So you see how he is slowly dropping his weapon and just looks at Valkyr, not knowing what to do. And he's ready to walk back slowly before Valkyr absolutely murders him anyway. Which could also be the animation for Hysterical Assault. You know, Valkyr just jumps like this and just absolutely downs him, murders him, whatever. The point is, instead of dropping the gun slowly like this, the target actually aims at Valkyr and he slowly walks back doing that motion. That's kinda my idea on it. It's in the trailer, it looks really cool, it's something that I would love for her to have. So duration scaling is for the traumatized duration and the range scaling is the 8 meters here, so that is pretty understandable. Then we have Augment Total Assault. Enemies are instead pulled towards Valkyr and are stunned for 3 seconds after the finisher. So this is a grouping tool, really nice, especially when Valkyr has a plethora of tools to deal with enemies up close, and his area is getting mega buffed from this rework, so you're gonna see that this actually ties in perfectly with that. Now, second ability, we have Warcry. Yep, the same exact thing. Because we have the 100% extra armor here, we're keeping the armor buff on Warcry as well, but we're buffing it to 100% at base to really bring that health tanking capability up to par. So now slow is removed, enemies now get traumatized on casts, and Eternal Ward does the same thing as before, but the armor on the helmet version is decreased to the 50% that it is currently. If you don't know, Warcry currently gives 50% base armor and 50% base attack speed with a 30% base speed reduction for the enemies that are hit within 25 meters. Pretty easy to understand. Well, this now makes it so that Warcry actually traumatizes people around her, just like her first ability in 25 meters, which is arguably way better than slowing the enemies. And then, you know, Eternal War, you just extend the duration depending on how many kills you get. So, really nice. Moving on to Scream, the third ability. So this replaces Prolonged Paralysis, but as you can see, we don't need to change the animation, because guess what is Prolonged Paralysis? Or, sorry, not Prolonged Paralysis, that's the augment. Paralysis, the third ability. It screams towards the enemies in a cone, which is exactly what this ability does. Would you look at that? Valkyr screams towards a direction, 40 degrees cone, 6 meter range, dealing 1000 base damage and pushing enemies away, ragdolling them. Enemies that hit a wall suffer an extra 60% of their maximum health as impact damage, which doesn't scale with strength. Now, if this did scale with strength, it would break completely. It would make Valkyr extremely broken because of another thing that I'm doing. And I don't really want Valkyr to be like a full-on caster Warframe that absolutely annihilates anything, but instead I want her to be having this as a tool to either push enemies away for safety or hold the ability to instead bring enemies towards Valkyr's direction. So either a grouping tool or an escape tool. Pretty good. Then we have the Augment Prolonged Stream. Holding the third ability now charges the ability for 1 second, adds 100% base range and armor strips enemies hit by the initial wave. So now, this no strength scaling makes sense, because 60% of enemy maximum health as damage, amplifying that with something like Roar, amplifying that with any form of viral damage, that is an insta-kill 100 out of 100 times. And since this augment now armor strips and adds base range, This absolutely destroys everyone that hit it. Now, I know it says base range, but because it's only 40 degrees on the cone, we can also make the cone like 78 degrees to have a way larger scaling to make sure that you get every enemy with it, so the augment can feel better. It is a niche augment, but it can be an augment that gets ridiculously high kills per minute, and investing into it might be worth it. So it is something that I wanted to do. And especially since Prolonged Paralysis augment is now built into the ability, basically, because I don't know if you know what Prolonged Paralysis does, sorry. I have it onto my Valkyr right here, and if I press 3, see how everyone is like clumped up in front of me, and you know, I can do this. It's pretty nice. And it happens no matter what angle I press it, no matter how many times I press it, it can just happen. So yeah, holding the ability down does this. Obviously, if you have a reverse like holding and touching the abilities or pressing the key, then you know you get the reverse version of it. So pressing the ability will actually pull the enemies towards you. That might be something you want, so you can just reverse it here. Now, most important thing, Hysteria. Hysteria stance reworked to match the fist stance. So fists in general are way more broken than sparring weapons. It is something that I talked about on my ranking melees video, and they are in general way more consistent, way more damage, and their stance are absolutely stupidly good. So heavy attack is now the fist heavy attack, but with a wave of energy that extended to 4 more meters of range. We can actually kind of saw that. If we equip the Steko Prime, right, we have Seismic Palm. And OP stuns that has, you know, this stupid combo that absolutely deals insane damage, but with Senokai, if we can get it, there we go. You see how there is a small wave that jumps in front of us? That isn't actually visual. We don't get any extra range. That is just visual. What I want to do is for Valkyr's 4th ability to have that wave actually and not it being visual. Like the wave actually exists. So yeah, normal combos are brand new. Flurry of attacks on neutral block combo, slam attacks on forward combos that lift enemies. I can't really show you right now from the top of my head how that would look like, but you know, neutral combo you do a lot of attacks at the same time, and if you do neutral and forward combo you slam attack the ground and lift enemies in the air, which would make it way better to play. Now, combo damage per hit increased to 200% and 300% hits, which is really good because currently all of the hits from Hysteria's combos deal 100% damage, which is why Hysteria is bad in the first place. If we go to Valkyr Prime Talents and check the combo percentages, you see all of these are 100%, 100%, 100%, and 100%. The only exception is the last attack from these two, which is 200%, and it's still not that great. But I remember we said that when you slide attack, it's actually good. Well, slide attack has 300% attacks, so that's why it's actually good. If it had 100% attacks, then slide attacks would also be bad. So let's make every attack actually be good. Obviously, this would make it so that because it matches the fist stance, the slide attack is a bit worse, but oh well. It's like, it's not something I wanted to do anyway. And, you know, slide attacks will be a bit worse, but they have a niche. I don't know if you know what fist slide attacks do. So let's say that Hysteria has a lot of slash damage. Slide attacks knock enemies up. They have a guaranteed lifted status. So you can do some interesting stuff with afflictions if you ever wish to. Now, base range is increased to 2.3 meters, base status chance is increased to 25%, currently it's only 10%, which makes it absolutely terrible, and crit chance is reduced from 50% to 35%. This is the same nerf that happened to, what is his name? Baruch. This is the same nerf that happened to Baruch in our Tekro 10 core update, and because you can equip Blood Rest and all that, Baruch is still absolutely incredible, and red crits like crazy. So this wouldn't hurt Valkyr whatsoever. Now, this would make a huge buff, but that's not the only thing that is happening. So this is the big thing. Hysteria no longer makes Valkyr immune. The lifesteal is removed for every attack, but now heavy attacks lifesteal for 1 to 5% of the damage dealt. Now, why 1 to 5%? Because the longer you're using Hysteria, there is the small circle around you that keeps growing and growing and growing. Currently, this circle doesn't do anything, but you see this thing. That is the lifesteal percentage going up on all your attacks. And 5% of literally millions of damage is enough to heal you to full HP with one heavy attack. So every time you get Tanukai, you pretty much heal to full, which is really great. Enemies within 5 to 20 meters of Valkyr, which is the circle you saw, will now do 50% less damage to her with scales with strength capped at 90%. Now, the more you hold the ability on Hysteria, the higher the drain goes. So you see now 220, 215, 210, 205, 200, 185, and this keeps going faster and faster and faster until on top right will reach 50%, where it's at its fastest. Wait, no, is it even more? I didn't even know that. It keeps going faster, but as you can see, the energy drain can get pretty ridiculous if you hold this ability down, and you will need to keep killing for a very long time until this actually makes more sense. But yeah, you see 50, 40, 30, 100%, 10, and the ability is over. So the more you hold it, the larger the energy drain goes, and it can go really, really high. I think it's 15 per second at base currently. So much energy cost decreased to 10 energy per second at 100% instead, which is way more manageable. That is without any ability efficiency. So with efficiency, you can get it down to like 4 or 3, and that would be really good because you can keep Hysteria active permanently. Now, using Hysterical Assault, her first ability while Hysteria is active, increases Valkyr's combo counter by 60 points. This is huge because when you press Hysteria or you want to deactivate and activate Hysteria again, you can get back to 12 times combo very, very quickly by casting your first ability 4 times. Casting your first ability 4 times will get you to max combo instantly, so this is an insane combination to have, and this makes Hysterical Assault a really good ability to keep in the build instead of actually just subsuming it. So that is about it for Hysteria. The augments, Valkyr has 2 augments for her 4th ability. I don't know what to do with the second one. If you guys have some ideas, I'd love to hear them down in the comments. But the augment for Enraged, now I made it so that instead of gaining crit chance and damage by putting the ability on a cooldown, now when you use it, heavy attacks from Hysteria gain 500% crit chance and 500% crit damage, but they cannot proc any status effects anymore. So you would be able to definitely see some damage caps with that, but you know, you don't get any slash procs anymore. Is it worth it? Probably. I wouldn't know. So, you know, we would have to test it, obviously. Now, obviously for obvious reasons, these crit chance and crit damages would not scale with strength, but in case we wanted to make them scale with strength, we could bump the percentage down to 300 and then make it strength scaling. So for 300%, you get 1000% crit chance and 1000% crit damage and go fucking nuts with it. But I mean, I think this is a way more balanced thing right here, instead of scaling it with strength, and it's gonna feel way better on a lot more builds. So not bad in general. So that's Valkyr rework. This is the favorite one from the paste bin for me, definitely. This is the one that calls out to me the most, and this is the one that I would mostly or be most excited to see if it ever got implemented in the game out of the 6 reworks I am presenting you today. Moving on to the next rework, we have, I think, the people's favorite. So I think people would be most excited for this one when they saw it, and it's Chroma. So base stats rework, if you compare it to the normal stats we have right now, we are reducing the health, reducing the armor, increasing the shield, and increasing the energy. The reason for this is simple. In Warframe currently we have a quote-unquote class of characters, right? We have the caster frames, we have the buffer frames, we have the support frames, and we have the assassin frames, which is usually the stealth frames. You know, we call them by different names. Some people call them stealth frames, some people call them assassin frames. You can call them whatever you want. But usually these are the classes we use. Now, we also have tanks, but these are usually buffer frames, so tanks and buffer frames are most of the time the same thing. So Chroma used to fall into the category of the tank buffer frame, right? Because Chroma, what he used to be, is a very stat stick over frames. You are throwing a bunch of stats on a Warframe, you're giving it a weapon, and you call it the day. That is super uninteractive. It doesn't really have satisfying gameplay, and it's just you keeping track of your numbers and just keeping your abilities up, which is not something that everyone would want to do. So I think it's time for a change. So we're making him a caster frame, give him a huge energy pool, give him way bigger shields, and then decreasing everything else. Passive. I know people are gonna go crazy over this one just because they can think of the possibilities with all the Helminth abilities. Chroma's abilities gain 1% ability range per kill, stacking up to 300 times. Yes. I think so. You will see a very good theme here for Chroma that I made. And I think this is the most successful rework by far on the spreadsheet. And it's because every ability, first of all, has the word elemental in it. Second of all, it has a form change, finally. Like, you're a dragon, you are an elemental dragon. And third of all, you scale as the mission goes on. Because the older dragons get in lore, the stronger they get. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, if you play dragon-related stuff, the older a dragon is, the stronger he is. Great. So, Chroma's elemental cycling passive stays. In case you don't know what that is, we're still in Valkyr. It's when Chroma he goes to his appearance, his emissive colors, decides what type of damage he is gonna be doing. That's it. So this stays. Now, excuse me. For the important stuff, we're gonna start with the third ability, because if we start from the first ability, nothing will make sense. Elemental Oppression, 75 energy cost. Chroma opens his wings and takes on his true form, gaining 30% parkour velocity, which scales with range, and while bullet jumping, Chroma leaves a wide trail of elemental damage in his path, dealing constant damage. While in Elemental Oppression, Chroma gains extra effects during his other abilities. So, you use third ability, you gain insane parkour velocity, which scales with your passive and with range, and while you're bullet jumping, you are shooting fire below you, basically. So, you do all that, and then while you're in this form, every other ability gets buffed. Great. The damage per second of the trail is 500 at base. I know it says 100 to 500. This is rank 0, this is rank 4. And the range is 5 meters wide, and the length is affected by Chroma's parkour velocity. Now, this 5 meter range obviously scales with range, and then parkour velocity also scales with range, so the ability to scale normally with range is just stated like this. Duration is 20 seconds of the ability. Duration of the actual trail of damage, I don't know, haven't decided yet. Can it be like 5 seconds, 3 seconds? Not sure. Not really sure. But augment constant oppression, gaining kills while augment constant oppression, gaining kills with abilities increases the duration of elemental oppression by a second, which is not affected by a duration, until double the ability's original duration. So 2 things about this augment. First of all, you need to be killing with abilities. It's very important. This is a caster frame. We need to kill with abilities. Same thing is happening with the passive. If you get kills with your weapons and not with abilities, the passive is not going to give you ability range. So these are both important. Then the third ability itself, we are getting 1 second per kill. Now you may be like, oh, that is not enough. But then you realize that in Warframe 100 kills per minute is the bare minimum, so this should work just fine even if you're not affected by duration. Which is great as well, because in case you want to run negative duration, this will make it so that the 15 seconds, let's say you have 15 seconds base duration, you can get it up to 30, and you can get it up to 30 really easily. Now, let's go for the big guns. First of all, we have Elemental Scream, which used to be Spectral Scream. It still stays as an ability. I want my dragon to spit fire, but I don't want the fire to feel like you're lighting a match onto the enemy. I want it to be fire. So, Chroma screams in a line in front of him, dealing constant damage and applying a guaranteed status effect from an element, which is obviously chosen by the passive here, with the Elemental Cyclone. Chroma can move freely while channeling this ability. He could already do, but I am stating that so that there is no confusion. Killing an enemy while Elemental Scream is active adds a random elemental status effect onto this ability and boosts the ability's damage by 30%. At 10 kills, Elemental Scream does every elemental status effects and gain 300% total damage. So, in total, in Warframe, we have 10 elemental status effects. So, when you get 10 kills, from there onwards, this ability is 300% more damage and does every status effect per second one time. So, you use this at an enemy, he's primed with every elemental status effect, and then the more he gets damage, the stronger the damage gets. He gets viral procs, he gets magnetic procs, he gets absolutely destroyed by this ability. So, pretty great. The current base damage of Spectral Scream is 400, increasing it by 100 to 500 is absolutely fine, especially since this ability is supposed to be the kill ability for Chroma, and Chroma can actually cast other abilities while casting Elemental Scream, which is something that before I think he was able to do, but it wasn't very used. Now, because this becomes a lot more OP, energy cost goes up to 25 from 10, and energy cost per second goes to 10 per second instead of 3 per second, which still can scale with ability efficiency and duration to go down to a minimum of 3 per second. You can no longer use weapons while Elemental Scream is active, and while Elemental Oppression, the third ability, is up, you gain 50% damage reduction while casting Elemental Scream, which scales with strength up to a cap of 90%. Sounds good? Great. Augment Superior Defense. I know the name is taken, so we have to change it. I don't know what it is yet. But each kill gives Chroma 25 shields, and shield value scales with strength. Great. So first ability, pretty bonkers for a kill ability, and it can actually scale really well depending on what you're building. Then we have Elemental Ward. This is gonna be a game changer, because you may say, oh, if Chroma loses Vex Armor, because Vex Armor obviously is not here anymore, then how is he gonna be supporting his team and himself to deal damage? Well, we're buffing Elemental Ward quite a bit. So, it's completely reworked. Chroma is imbued with energy, gaining 75% damage reduction and gaining a buff for him and his ally. This 75% damage reduction does not scale with strength whatsoever. It's a flat 75% damage reduction. So, hit Chroma. Chroma and his allies gain 50% more status damage, which is capping at 100% status damage at 200% strength. All of the buffs that we're going to talk about, they have a cap at 200% strength, all of them respectively, because if they didn't, they would be absolutely broken. So, we have status damage on hit Chroma, and enemies that hit Chroma suffer a hit proc, dealing this. So, to help you understand how much damage that is, because, you know, you're probably not gonna understand much without a calculator. So, let's go to a fairly high level. Let's go to base Steelpath level 130 Corpus unit. That's great. The damage of a Corpus Moa would go to around 1500. So let's type 1500 in. That is 100% of the enemy bullet damage. Then we have Chroma's shields percentage. If Chroma is running Prime Redirection with us, his shield would be around 1800. So let's add 1800, and then that's multiplied by the strength multiplier. So if we have 225% ability strength, that would be times 2.25, and your damage is 1500. No, wait, 3300. Sorry, I did the wrong thing. I didn't press multiply, I pressed subtract. My bad. It's not even subtract. I don't even know. I don't know English. My bad. So 7425 damage. Now, this version of the ability is the weakest one. Hit Chroma, the reflection part, is the weakest one because two reasons. First of all, heat status effect is OP already. Second of all, this gives you status damage, so the heat status effect that comes after from the enemy hitting you is gonna deal more damage than the initial hit. And third of all, did I mention status damage is OP? It is. It really is. Especially with other Chroma's abilities. It synergizes the best with every other ability for Chroma, so it has to have something that is the weaker. I don't know why I closed calculator, we're gonna need it anyway, so let's open it back up. Now let's go to Electricity Chroma. Chroma and his allies gain 40% damage reduction to shields, capped at 80%. Enemies that hit Chroma suffer an electric proc, dealing. Let's take the same formula, 1500 damage from the enemy bullet. Now this percentage of primary weapons, critical chance. I wonder, what if I used, what should I use? Let me go overboard and actually build for this directly and use a Latron Prime. My Latron Incarnon has 359.4% critical chance. Great, so that's times 3.9594 crit chance. So we have this, and then times 2.25. 12,000 electricity damage to the enemy that shoots us. That is pretty decent, isn't it? That is probably close to twice the damage that the heat proc dealt, but that is pretty decent, isn't it? I think that's really good. Then we have Toxin Chroma. Chroma and his allies gain 50% headshot damage, capped at 100%. This is also a very strong buff. Enemies that hit Chroma suffer a Toxin proc, dealing 100% of enemy bullet damage, plus percentage of secondary weapon status chance. Works the same way as this one, and then the strength multiplier. Great. Don't need the calculator on this one. And then we have Chroma and his allies gain 50% more resources and credits from kills. You may be like, no, my Profit Taker. Your Profit Taker is still here, but it's even better. Now you can farm Kuva and Still Essence with this guy. Now you can actually help your entire team farm Kuva, Still Essence, and credits with this guy. Isn't that wonderful? Enemies that hit Chroma suffer a cold proc, dealing 100% of enemy bullet damage multiplied by your melee weapons combo counter plus the stealth multiplier. So melee weapon combo counter, this is a bit weird, so I think this needs explanation. So 1500. What combo counter should we use? Let's see, we are at 220, which would be 12x. That would be times, that would be times 2.20 for 220 combo, which is the maximum, which would be this. And then that's multiplied by 2.25, our strength percentage. So as you can see, this is also quite weak, and it's obviously because the passive part is already so OP. Now, this doesn't come with only buffs. Aura range is reduced from 12 meters to 10 meters. Max passive though can take that to 40 meters, which is plenty, not plenty, I don't know what plenty is. And duration is reduced to 15 seconds from 25 seconds. So overall, a bit more balanced in this part by nerfing these. And then Chroma's allies gain the buff when Chroma presses the ability and retain it instead of having to stay close to him at all times. Currently, when Chroma presses Elemental Ward, his allies gain the buff, but in order to maintain the buff, if he's not using Everlasting Ward, they will have to stay close to him at all times. Now, if they run out of the range, they keep the buff, but if they were out of the range to begin with when Chroma pressed the ability, they don't gain the buff at all and they just miss it outright. Consistency. We love consistency of Warframe, and when things work consistent, they never do, but I want to. So, while an elemental oppression is up, enemies that hit Chroma take an extra status proc per hit. This is huge for hit Chroma mostly, and electricity. The rest is not that great. Toxin is already really good and it's gonna be used in situations where you're against Corpus, obviously, but this is mainly a buff to heat and electricity that can definitely reach the highest percentages of it. So, really good. Now, the only thing that is kinda nerfed from this Toxin Chroma is the fact that Toxin Chroma's aura used to scale with, enemy percentage max health. Or not percentage max health. It's scaled with enemy level, sorry. And because enemy level, even though it scales upwards really high, their enemy HP doesn't do as much. Which means that there were situations that Chroma's second ability could one-shot enemies at level cap, and that was pretty funny. But I think having a huge variety of buff onto you and your team instead, and having more consistent stuff along the board is gonna be a bit better, but I understand it would be something that people would miss. And then we have the augment. Combining word. After casting, Chroma can choose between one of his 3 other available elemental works to work alongside the original, which means you can actually choose to use heat and electricity ward at the same time. The effects of the elemental wards are 50% weaker, but the durations are doubled. So you're having double the duration, but now the cap of 100% is gonna be capped at 50% on the headshot damage, for example, and same for everything else. Excuse me. So the effects, this is still a great augment. You can choose to have resource booster and headshot damage, or credit booster and headshot damage. That is really, really good. But in general, you would probably want to use this on a team environment in normal missions or on arbitrations where you would need like status damage plus more resources. I think that's really nice. Then we have the helmet, because it's the helmet ability. All effects are 50% weaker, 75% with the augment. Damage reflection passive is not affected by this. And why is it not affected by this? Because it doesn't fucking work. I don't mind the damage reduction existing. I think Nova's Null Star also has 75% damage reduction, which is fine. Same with the Eclipse, same with everything else. So this having 75% damage reduction is fine. If you want to have the 75% damage reduction be 50%, that's still fine by me, but I wanted to stay as the helmet ability because that would open some interesting scenarios where this helmet could be used as both a damage reduction ability and a damaging ability for a lot of frames. And to balance it out, you can code it the same way as Eclipse, Roar, and Zada's Whisper, where it's considered a buff ability. So if you're on Mirage, you can't actually use Elemental Ward and Eclipse, but it's kind of like pick your poison with this thing. This would definitely be what I would do, at least. So yeah. Elemental Oppression we talked about. So finally, 4th ability, Elemental Singularity. And now this is where you realize this cooks hard. Chroma makes a circle in the ground, dealing constant damage and dragging enemies affected by a status effect to its center. After a brief period of time, the ability explodes, dealing massive damage to enemies in its radius. During Elemental Oppression in the During Elemental Oppression, his third ability, enemies in the center suffer 50% more status damage from Chroma's abilities, and Chroma also flaps his wings forwards, putting the third ability's damage in front of him. So this has many ways to become broken. First of all, imagine public squad. If we're in a public squad, you put the ability down, it covers a huge area of the map, your allies are on another area of the map, you are just standing there in front of it, and you're pressing this with Elemental Oppression up. What happens? First of all, you have a bunch of enemies in front of you that, because you flap your wings forward and this ability is dealing constant damage in front of you that is elemental, then the ability will do some kind of status proc. The enemies will be dragged in the middle and they will be taking constant damage. Now your teammates have some kind of weapon that also deals a status proc and another enemy gets dragged in the middle. Now you as Chroma have your first ability up and every enemy that is in the middle suddenly gets burned to death by your first ability and take 50% extra status damage, because why not? Now the status damage can be combined with 100% extra status damage from the heat elemental ward, so it's 150% more status damage, and suddenly your first ability is taking them for 100,000 damages until they die. If that's not enough, when the brief period of time dies, the enemies explode and it deals another hit proc, dealing 50% more status damage if an enemy survives, and 100% from the heat chroma if an enemy survives again. So, it can go absolutely nuts. Yes. So, yeah. Base range, 15 meters. affected by range normally, which means with the maxed out passive, this ability has a base range of 60 meters. Now, obviously, this is not base range is 15, so if you added another to 100% range, you get another 30 meters of range and take it up to 90 meters. Are you fine with 90 meters range? I am completely fine with 90 meters of range. Damage per second is 300, affected by strength. The duration is 3 seconds, which is the brief period before the ability explodes, and that is affected by duration normally. And the explosion damage is 10,000 at base, which is affected by strength, and it deals a guaranteed status proc depending on the emissive color. Pretty good. So, Augment, Explosive Singularity. Enemies dragged in the middle get absorbed by the Singularity, and the damage that would be dealt by their status effect is added to the final explosion damage and then multiplied by 0.75 times, scaling with strength. Let's do some math. Hello, calculator. So, let's say we have 200% strength. Great. Explosion deals 20,000 damage. Then we are adding, let's say, 20 enemies. So let's do the enemies first. So the enemies, we have 20 enemies with a status effect. This status effect is dealing, let's say, around 20,000 damage per second. Is that good enough? Nah, let's do 15,000 damage per second. So 15,000 damage times 8, that is 120k. Now that's times 20. Yeah. Dude, and yeah, I don't think I need to elaborate any further. This augment would make Bombolia. If you dragged enemies to the middle and actually absorb them with this, you would absolutely bomba everything with this augment and see some crazy damages. And we're all about those crazy damages. One other thing to note about this ability that I don't have here is that this ability doesn't respect line of sight checks, but the explosion from the ability is on the very middle of the ability. And it has the same exact range as the circle that it creates. So why is that? Because if it did respect line of sight checks, then enemies that would be dragged by it wouldn't explode, which doesn't make sense. And if you make it so that every explosion is like at some point of the ability, then first of all, that would be way harder to code. Second of all, that could lag the game. Third of all, that could still be inconsistent with the damage. And fourth of all, it could bug out a lot of times. So simply, no line of sight checks, same explosion range as the circle range on the ground. So yes, with all this, Chroma becomes an elemental dragon that is spewing out fire, destroying the battlefield, flying, just doing whatever he wants. And if he wants to go back to his old school, weapon buffing capabilities, he still can by subsuming Elemental Screen for a damage buffing ability, because Elemental Ward in the current version that I have it is not coded as a weapon ability. I think this rework would absolutely bang, and it would be a great hit for players if it could add it. But obviously my numbers are not correct here. As I said, I'm not a game designer, but I still want to hear your thoughts on what you guys think of this Chroma rework before I move to the next one. It is really, really nice, and overall, I think having Chroma onto this direction of being a caster frame instead of a boring gun buffing frame that we have in millions of would be way, way better for his popularity and his playstyles. Moving on onwards, we have Oberon. So Oberon is probably the most anticipated rework for the game. A lot of people think Oberon is one of the worst Warframes in the game, and they have every right to say that. And I am giving him a way, way different playstyle and something that doesn't really exist in the game currently, but I thought it would be a good idea to put it in the game, and that is making him something like a druid from Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons, D&D. So the changes go as like this. So we first of all buff his health and armor mainly. I don't know if I did any other buffs, but health and armor are the main ones. because the third ability is gone and he needs a way to survive that is very, very optimal. So, passive. Oberon's companions gain special effects. Volpaphilas gain 25. Volpaphilas are the only special one and they come first. They give 25% evasion to the team. Every other companion gives buffs to itself and not the team. But Volpaphilas give the evasion to the team specifically. So Volpaphilas 25% evasion to the team. Parasites gain 25% status damage. Kubros gain 25% critical damage. Kavats gain 25% ability duration. Sentinels gain 25% status chance. Hounds gain 25% ability damage. And Moas gain 25% reduced ability cooldown. These are all, for their specific class, very, very good. You know, having crit damage on Kubros is insane. Having status damage on Parasites insane. Having status chance on Sentinels is insane. Ability damage on Hounds insane. Everything is really good and fitting depending on what you're using, which makes it really, really good. And current Oberon passive works around companions again, but it is only the passive that kind of specializes with your companion. And I want to make it so that Oberon actually plays alongside his companion, and that Oberon's companion plays a big role and a big part of his gameplay. So, first ability is Smite. Smite stays the same from casting on an enemy. It doesn't change whatsoever, everything stays the same. You can still do the niche stuff to do level cap one-shots with Smite and Zada's Whisper. All of this good stuff stays. Now though, you can hold the ability to instantly down your companion and deal 5000 base radiation damage on enemies near it, and automatically casting an extra instance of Smite on enemies hit. Base range 5 meters. So, let's say you have a Kubro or Kavat, and it is fighting really close to a huge group of enemies and absolutely destroying them. You can hold the ability down. And that will down your companion. It will do crazy damage to everybody, and you will be able to get radiation procs onto everyone. Everyone will take really good damage after the explosion because everyone has casted Smite onto each other, and in general, you're having a good time. Companions killed by this ability have 50% reduced recovery time. Very special to Oberon. This ability is the Helminth, and recovery time for the Helminth part is increased by 50% instead, and the recovery time being reduced to 50% means that the companion will most likely come back up almost instantly if you're using the correct bond modes. Augment stays the same, holding the ability now downs the companion, gives you the explosion, and also gives you 100% radiation damage to your weapon as it used to be. Second ability, Hold Ground. Damage up from 100 to 200 per second. Angled is 360 degrees. Hollow ground is now a circle. Currently, the way hollow ground works is that you press it, and it's a weird ass carpet. And I'm not joking. If we go to the 2017 type of build that I used on my April Fool's video, and we stand here and we press it, we now have this beautiful square carpet. No circle, just lines. It is literally a square. And I'm not sure why that is, but you know, that's actually how it works, and it's kind of broken. So making it a circle kind of decreases its range, but it makes it way more manageable. And because Hollowed Ground will now armor strip enemies that stand on it every second, this is just a big buff for it in general. Now, if you want more Hollowed Ground range, we would give it to you. Currently, its base range is kind of low, but keeping the range like this actually helps quite a bit. Everything else about the ability stays the same. Augment Hollowed Eruption works exactly the same, but now deals blast damage. If you don't know what Hollowed Eruption does, it's right here. Holding the reactivates to deal all remaining damage and radiation status, and then it gives the ability 100% more duration. So you make this ability have the same exact thing, but instead of dealing the radiation damage that it actually deals, it deals a good blast proc to blast enemies that are affected, and if they're armor stripped, they're most likely taking a lot of damage. Great. We have third ability now. This is the thing that changes everything. Empowered Companion Oberon's companions gain special effects and 75% of the damage dealt to Oberon instead redirected to the companions, which caps at 90%. Beasts, this scales with range, by the way. The more strength you have, the more, the more damage reduction you get to Oberon. Beasts grow in size and gain 50% more damage from all sources, which scales with strength. 10% of their damage dealt is converted to Overguard for them. So, what does this mean? Beasts, first of all, beasts are Vulpaphalas, they're Predicides, Kubrus, Kavats, those are all beasts. So if you're using any of those, they grow in size, gain 50% more damage, and then their damage dealt is converted to Overguard for them, so they can tank the shots that you are getting and that they're getting at the same time. Robotics instead shrink in size and gain 75% evasion. Shield gate duration is increased to 3 seconds, and enemy killed by their abilities grant them 100 shields, which scales with strength. This is amazing for Hounds, and it could be amazing for specific Sentinels, but in general, Hounds benefit the most from this. The 75% evasion is really nice because that means that your Sentinel can now dodge bullets pretty effectively. So if you find a way to actually dodge bullets yourself or kind of tank them, then you can have an insanely strong companion by doing just this. If your companion suffers fatal damage, make it invincible for the next 5 seconds and disable this ability with a 30 seconds cooldown. Duration, base duration 25 seconds. So this can be combined with the first ability, the holding down part. So if your companion is about to die, you hold the first ability to kill it because it will die anyway, and you get the extra explosion. This ability goes on cooldown and the companion has a 50% reduced recovery time. Then we have Reinforcing Companion. I know people using Rare Glass. You guys, I know who you are. You're gonna love this. Oberon gains 5% weapon critical chance per companion killed while the ability is active, capped at 500%. You like 500% weapon critical chance, gentlemen? You got it. Fight alongside your Rare Glass and make it proud. Fourth ability, Reckoning. Works exactly the same, armor stripped is removed. Enemies affected by companions' abilities or status effects take the remaining damage of said ability status effect in one instance. Currently, what Reckoning does, instead of you, in case you don't know, I don't have energy, give me a second, press it, it does this animation, and then the ability, if the enemy was on hollowed ground, they get armor stripped, but that's literally all it does. So, works the same, if the enemy is affected by companion abilities or status effects, it does the remaining damage. But if the enemy is also on hollowed ground while this has happened, the status effects reapply after the explosion with 50% effectiveness. So if your companion, for example, had done, let's say, 50 hit procs, 50 electric procs, it can happen. You press this ability, somehow if the guy survives, you get 25 hit procs, 25 electric procs, and then the guy keeps burning. Then we have Defensive Reckoning on the Augment, which is the same as Frost's fourth ability Augment that I don't remember what it's called currently, but allies gain 60 Overguard per enemy hit. So you gain Overguard if you're using this to yourself and your allies, and in general it is a really good way if you want to avoid using the third ability maybe, or if you want to go for something else. So pretty good here. Just buffs all around to everything and making his companion way stronger than it is before, and you work alongside it to make a really strong Warframe. It's a way different playstyle. I like it a lot, and I'm also giving him the capability to work as a nuke frame for himself and the ability to have good supporting capabilities for his team as well, besides their companion one-shotting everything. Moving on to the next rework, we're gonna have something that people are gonna find interesting. So Inaros, I think Inaros unironically might be one of the worst Warframes in the game because his passive is well, fucking, I can't. It's one of the worst things I've ever experienced in Warframe, especially with Last Gasp and how OP Last Gasp is right now. Overriding Last Gasp to have this is absolutely, I can't. It's so bad. It's really just so bad. So look, let's die. It's gonna take a bit, obviously, because, Inaros. We might not even be able to, because, yeah, Kabat and whatever, but... Okay, we're dead. Now, we can't last gasp at all. We have to use this. You have no prompt for last gasp or anything. You just have to use his passive. When you revive, you're fine. But if you don't manage to revive from the hits, if there are not enough enemies to actually hit so you can safely revive, you die. Like, you straight up die. How is that ever a good idea for a late game frame to actually utilize this? So, he doesn't have any good health tanking capabilities. Like, oh my god, for Steel Path, base Steel Path, he's so good. Who cares? My Wisp for base Steel Path is fucking unkillable. And I do mean what I'm saying. She is absolutely unkillable. So I don't see why I would pick Inaros over Wisp at any day if Inaros' main thing is not being able to die in Steel Path. So let's make him unkillable in any type of situation. So, base armor increased to 450, base energy increased to 225. 450 armor is a good milestone to use Steel Fiber, Umbral mods, and everything like that. Anything and everything can work. So, passive. In Inaros, first of all, revive passive completely gone. We are removing that shit immediately. But, Inaros gains 100 armor, 10 health regen per second when he uses a finisher. This stacks up to 40 times, and it lasts for the rest of the mission. So at 40 stacks, at 40 finishers, you gain 4000 armor and 400 health regen per second. This is already bonkers. This is absolutely insane. If Inaros loses more than 50% of his health within 2 seconds, he becomes invulnerable for 5 seconds and loses 2 stacks of his passive. If he has had no stacks, the passive does not work. So, to put a failsafe onto this ability, in case it doesn't work for some reason, it would work exactly like Mesmer Skin. If in the old days, you would be able to damage yourself with AoE weapons. And when Revenant was released, he could put Mesmer Skin, and then he could shoot himself with melee weapons, which wouldn't actually kill him. They would damage him, but he would go down to 2 HP, never die, no knockdowns, no damage dealt to him, no Mesmer skill stacks lost, so everything is fine. So if this effect triggered, but Inaros was gonna die from the damage instead, put Inaros at 2 HP and have him regen with the rest of his stacks and call it a day. Thumbs up. So first ability, Desiccation. Desiccation, the Pocket Sand, it stays. Damage changes to 100 from 152 on hits and 8 per second for 8 seconds to 1000 impact damage. Blind duration increased from 8 seconds to 15 seconds. Enemies take 200% finisher damage while blinded by this ability, and enemies are now downed and vulnerable to ground finishers. The augment stays the same, which is the sand kitties from the 4th ability, basically. Helmet version is same as the original ability, so the changes that happen here also apply to the helmet version of the ability, so the enemies are now, put to the ground for ground finishers. Second ability, Sunstorm. Inaros summons the mighty winds of Mars to help him in his fight, creating an area around him that is constantly following him and replicating a Sunstorm, directed to the left, instead of a circle. So you know how usually in Sandstorm is like blowing a wind towards one direction instead of being like a literal hurricane? I think this is more of a Sandstorm than a sand hurricane. I think this is like a way better way to do it. So in general, just have the ability following him instead of him turning into the ability, and then he can do more stuff while the ability is up, shoot enemies, do whatever he needs. The area deals 100 impact damage per second to enemies with 0% status chance, so it cannot actually proc any impact, and enemies that get in range have their perceptions limited. They are unable to see more than 10 meters away, with scales opposite with strength capped at 4 meters at 225% range. So the more range you have, the less your enemies can see by this ability, basically. Enemies killed with finishers while this ability is active generate a Swarm Kavat from the 4th ability. Augment Blinding Sunstorm. Enemies affected by this ability for 2 seconds get blinded for 5 seconds and knocked down, opening them to ground finishers. Once again, works the same way as the first ability, and this ties into his passive just like his first ability. But here is when things get interesting. Third ability, Reworks. Curse. Inaros chooses an enemy and curses him. The cursed enemy takes 500% damage from finishers, 100% status damage, and will spread any finisher status effects onto his closest enemy. So, 3 things to note here. First of all, the curse, you do an animation, you curse one enemy, that's it. The enemy now takes 500% damage from finishers only. He takes 100% status damage from all sources, so if you want to use this ability on a disruption target and then fuck him up with status damage, you can. And will spread any finisher status onto his closest enemy. So if you kill this guy with a finisher, then the status effect that would be generated from that finisher, because ground finishers usually do a slash status effect, will jump to a new enemy and spread the curse around. The status effect of the finisher applies curse to the enemy its own and spreads to the closest enemy during its duration. So this means that the duration of curse and how much it will spread doesn't matter with the duration of Inaros' abilities, but the duration, the status duration of your melee weapon. So, this applies curse to its enemy its own, and the closest enemy, it just bounds its own. So if we have, let's say, 13 seconds, we had 100% extra status duration, that would be 16 seconds of status duration, so 16 ticks, and that would make it so that we would be able to kill 16 enemies if the ticks can one-shot every enemy that the curse is on. So the duration of this is not refreshed until another finisher attack is completed into any other enemy. The curse will keep spreading to enemies within 20 meters of the original curse target until the status effect runs out, and curse cannot be reapplied to another enemy until the status effect is over. So in order to reapply curse or to refresh the duration of the status effect, you gotta find the cursed enemy while this curse is happening and he's dealt the status damage, and then kill him, or else you're not able to cast another ability or refresh the status of it, and you will have to wait for it to run out, which is still fine because it's gonna do its job just fine. And then we have the Augment, Overwhelming Curse. The curse will apply to any target instead of just one target at a time. The curse has minus 50% range, and Inaros gains 100% status duration onto his weapons. So I don't need to note why this is really good. I don't need to note why this happens. Obviously, applying the curse to anybody within the original target instead of just, having a 20-meter range of whatever the fuck it is. Yeah, it would go really crazy. So if we had 200% status duration, 200% range, and we used a really, really good melee weapon for the ground finisher to proc 1000% of its bleed damage, we would put curse onto one enemy, ground finish him, and now every second, every enemy within 20 meters of this one enemy, because we have 200% strength, they just die. And then the enemies that were closest to the targets, the next target would also get the curse. And then the curse would spread and spread and spread and spread and keep spreading until the status effect runs out 24 seconds later. So, as an AoE tool with the correct build, this would be crazy. This is literally the God King Inaros type thing that you're all dreaming of. And guess what? It can be done whenever you want on solo, and it can be done in a squad if you're fast enough. The issue with Inaros and this rework is gonna be still that Inaros in a team environment would be not that great outside of his second ability. Now, is that a big issue considering how strong Curse is? I don't think so. I think it's fine to have solo-based Warframes in the game, and I think it's totally healthy to do that, and buffing Inaros in a way that you can give him some kind of nuke to have, onto his kit along with being able to tank, that is gonna be really good because there is so many other Warframes that can do the exact same thing. So bringing Inaros up to par with them would be really good. Last but not least, we have Scarab Swarm, which the total amount of Swarm Kavats is just increased from 5 to 9. Currently, Swarm Kavats are capped to 3 for the 4th ability, and then you can get extra 2 from Desiccation. Now you just make it so that all the Swarm Kavats are counted as your 4th ability, and you have a cap of 9 regardless of where you get it from, even the 1st ability, 2nd ability, or 4th ability. No damage or functionality changes. So I think this rework would go really hard for Inaros mains. Inaros mains would love this. It would open a new playstyle focused around doing finishers and doing as many finishers as possible. And his passive would make it so that he could actually work for health tanking even at the highest levels. And because finishers can scale incredibly well onto high level, Curse would become an amazing ability for him. Last but not least, we have Banshee. So Banshee is a character I adore. I really love playing Banshee. I really love her idea, her playstyle, and I think it's kind of dated, but it can, out of all the frames that I've talked about today, she is the least dated one and the one in the least need of buffs or rework. But I think a rework is long overdue to her, and at least some kind of buffs would be nice. But this is my take on how I would rework Banshee. So first of all, base stat chains, the normal, both of them get a energy buff, normal and prime version. And then we move directly to the passive. Headshot kills increase Banshee's damage by 100% for the next 10 seconds. So this is the same as the Garuda passive, which works on the abilities as well, refreshable but not stackable. And same scaling as Garuda passive means that if you're using Roar, this scales multiplicatively with Roar, which is absolutely ludicrous. Then we have first ability, Sonic Boom. So current Banshee first ability is actually Sonic Boom as well. Now, you may be like, why the hell wouldn't you change this? This is bad. Well, I'm changing it, but it's actually Sonic Boom now. So Banshee charges the energy of the void and starts blasting enemies around her every 5 seconds with a Sonic Boom that stuns them and opens them to headshots. So instead of having this directly in front of you, it will do it around Banshee all the time, and instead of actually pushing them away like Sonic Boom does currently, currently not correctly, we would get the Harrow first ability animation where enemies would open themselves to finishers with their hands either standing out or their hands being at their ears, trying to relieve them from the pain of being basically deafened. And then on the last blast, enemies get pushed away from Banshee. If they hit a wall, they suffer 60% of their maximum health as impact damage with scales with strength. Duration 25 seconds. So this is a small CC type of ability, which, you know, this is a very small CC. Doesn't actually last for a very long time. You can make it last for a very long time to make this CC pretty consistent, but what I would do is make it last like 6 seconds at base, so that you get a blast emitting every 5 seconds with the base strength. But even if you went negative strength, enemies will still be stunned pretty consistently because the duration is 6 seconds. But one thing that I would want to do is make the duration of the stun from Banshee's first ability maybe not scale with duration, which would be kind of a nerf, but I think 6 seconds is a good starting point. Maybe you can make a scale with duration and lower it to like 3 seconds at base and all that, but overall that's kind of the sweet spot, 6 second duration. Then the duration of the actual ability is 25 seconds, so every 5 seconds there's a Sonic Boom. It's 25 second duration, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th is very, very strong, way stronger than before. And obviously one thing that I would love for Banshee is to get a rework on how her abilities sound. The sound design of modernized Warframes is absolutely insane, and having current version Banshee and silence being, you know, hello, I'm under the water, bloop, 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 type thing, it doesn't really fit into the game anymore. So instead, what I can kind of reference here is a small game called Insight, and we are looking at the Sonic Boom level. So this, I will skip it to the point where the Sonic Boom happens and where it's like really at its peak. So here you go. So listen to the sound design of this level real quick. That is how a Sonic Boom should sound like. It's beautiful, you know? We can make this in Warframe, and that's kind of how the ability, I got the inspiration from the ability, that exact level, basically. So strength reduces the time between the blasts, capped at every 2 seconds. So at 250% strength, the blast that would stun enemies would happen every 2 seconds around Banshee. Damage is same as the original, which is 50 impact, and range is the same as the original, which is 15 meters. Augment Sonic Fracture works the same, which is to armor strip the enemies by 70% if they are hit by Sonic Boom. So Sonic Boom, you know, that would be a really good reliable CC ability that would open enemies to headshots and potentially armor strip them with Sonic Fracture, which is really great. This ability is now the helmet. That is because silence is removed, but don't get your pitchforks out yet. I am not removing silence. I'm not removing silence's effects. I'm just removing silence as the ability you know and love. It's gonna be in, but it's not gonna be the helmet. Well, that kind of sucks for some Warframes, but you can live with that, I'm 100% sure. The helmet version of this has the nerf that the final blast that pushes enemies away and they suffer 60% of their max health as impact damage, it doesn't actually work anymore. So that's great. Now, with Sonic Fracture, this could work the same way as the Valkyr rework, kinda, but you would need to mod for a whopping 14% or 13% duration, however much it is if you use Transient Fortitude and Floating Expertise. And I'm not sure if that would be worth it to absolutely kill this ability in favor of just a nuke button. Maybe it is, but I wouldn't be able to know, because, you know, you wouldn't be able to use any other helmet from this, you wouldn't be able to, you know, increase it with roar or anything, so it would need quite a bit of a weird investment to actually make this a kill ability. So you're gonna go crazy with it, but I'm not someone to stop you. So second ability, Sonar. This is the big thing. So Sonar now targets headshots only and deafens the enemy's hits, which is a new status, making them 30% slower and have 30% less accuracy. Enemies affected by the ability are also silenced, stunned for 1 second, and unable to perform their special abilities. The stun animation is reworked so that the enemy heads are way more exposed. So the effects of silence are in the Sonar now, directly. If the enemy is affected by Sonar, Sonar now targets their heads and deafens them. And that also puts the effects of silence directly onto the enemies. The stun animation is reworked so that the enemy heads are way more exposed. Same thing as I talked about with the Harrow thing, you would make it so that, well, if we look at current version silence, you will see that when I press it, the enemies will grab their heads and it will be very hard to actually target their head. You see that? It's really difficult to actually target their head unless the actual animation is over. And when you're, you know, in a horde shooter, you don't want to actually aim at their headshot and try to follow it. You kind of want to shoot at their head directly. So fixing that. Still works with abilities, and they also trigger headshot damage. This is big, but to counteract this, we're nerfing the damage per Sonar to 3 times instead of 5 times, which is kind of a big nerf if you stack Sonar multiple times, but at the same time, abilities can now headshot with this, and now this triggers headshots on its own, which in itself is a multiplier on top of a multiplier. So at the end of the day, it could be a buff as well if you did the math with really high damage. So Defend Comp is at 70%. Also, I forgot to mention that this also makes it so that you can use mods like Pistol and Primary IQD and get advantage of Deadhead and all that stuff, which is really, really nice. Defend Cap 70%. This is the 30% slow and 30% less accuracy. It's capped at 70% and it scales with strength. And the range is reduced from 35 meters to 20 meters for balancing reasons. Augment with Resonance works exactly the same, and that would make it so that when you kill an enemy affected by Sonar, the Sonar would travel to other enemies with the exact same range. This makes it so that at the end of the day, if you use Sonar with a lower range and Resonance, you would have both Sonar and Silence buffed as abilities, because Silence would get extra range and Sonar would get way more damage and would be way more consistent. Overall, really nice changes in my opinion, makes the ability way more consistent and makes it so that it can actually work with weak point mods and all that good stuff. Then third ability, the reworked ability, is called Retract. No cast time to 75 energy. What does no cast time mean? Very important to understand no cast time. Siren's second ability, Molt. This is what no cast time looks like. I press 2, it instantly happens. No animation, no anything. I just press 2 and it happens. Why is this useful? Many reasons. First of all, Shield Gate. When you press this ability, you can Shield Gate consistently, regaining your shields and absolutely being able to be safe at all times, which is amazing, because Banshee's Shield Gating till currently is her first ability, which has a pretty lengthy animation that kind of holds her in place. Now, this having no cast time and having 75 energy at base is a guaranteed brief respite build with catalyzing shields if you need to Shield Gate like that. Then we have the actual ability. Banshee can retract her abilities back to herself, keeping them active and giving them a different effect. So, keeping them active, I'm saying this because, I'm retracting the ability. Do I deactivate the ability when I do this? No, the ability stays active, you can just retract one part of the ability directly to you. So, by retracting, that's pretty forgiving as well. So, like Sonic Boom travels out or fourth ability travels out, Sunrise on enemies, you can retract it and then it gets better, even if the visual part of it has run out completely. Like even if you're like 3 seconds behind that or whatever, you can press retract and it will still happen. At any point it will actually work. A long time should pass like from the Soundquake wave to disappear to actually not be able to retract, and retract as an ability will keep track of that by itself and you will be able to use it pretty consistently and benefit from it. So the actual effects. Sonic Boom, retracting the blast increases the status damage to enemies hit by 50%. So if you're using this part of the ability with the first one, then you have the first ability opening them to headshots, making them like armor stripped with Sonic Fracture, and possibly being sonared as well. So that's armor strip, headshot vulnerability, CC, and another 50% increase in the status damage just in case they survive. And also Banshee has the headshot damage passive. So that's a lot of damage coming out. Then we have Sonar. Enemies are pulled to Banshee and get opened up to finishers, dealing 300% damage. This is where the Augment Savage Silence used to come in. Old Savage Silence was enemies affected by Silence suffer 300% finisher damage, which scales with strength. This is the exact same thing. Scales with strength. Enemies are also pulled to Banshee, so it's easier to get the finisher procs on them. Then Soundquake retracts the wave, dealing 100% of its damage. Well, actually, let's talk about Soundquake retracting after we talk about the Soundquake itself. And the augment itself, Deadly Retraction, killing an enemy with a retracting ability will automatically cast Retract again. So if you're casting Retracts and the retracting ability kills someone, then Retract will cast again. if the retracting ability kills multiple people, then the cast of retract will happen multiple times as well. This is a very overpowered augment. And then, you know, we'll go back to this. I forgot that enemies hit by the retracting abilities give Banshee and her allies 100 shields. So this plays into the shield gating mechanics that we talked about, and you can also abuse something like Arcane Aegis pretty frequently because it's enemies hit and not enemies killed by the retracting abilities, which makes this ability absolutely bonkers. Then we have Soundquake. So Soundquake is 25 energy plus 10 energy per wave now. I don't know what it is currently, but 25 energy plus 10 energy per wave, and you will see why. So Banshee brings her full focus onto the battlefield and coats herself in a protective sound barrier, giving her overguard equal to 2 times her current shields. So if Banshee has the current shields at 800, let's say, then the overguard would be 600, which is not plenty, but it's decent to save her and keep her alive for a bit so she can actually cast the ability and stick onto it for a bit. She then releases a wave of energy every 3 seconds, dealing blast damage and adding a blast proc to the enemy. Enemies hit are pushed away from Banshee by 2 meters with scales with range, and that's it. Now, there is a lot of changes. So, first of all, releasing a wave of energy every 3 seconds. So she presses the ability, gains overguard, releases the initial wave, and then every 3 seconds she releases another wave, and it just keeps going. So, what do these waves look like, and what could they look like? What would be the sound design for them? Anything? Well, Banshee Prime trailer actually exists and can help us a lot here with that. So if you haven't seen it, and I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't, here is how they did it on the trailer. So pretty good sound design in my opinion in general. A bit loud, I didn't actually expect that. So charges, puts down, initial wave happens, then every 3 seconds another wave happens, pushes the enemies back, deals constant damage. Sounds perfect. The sound, the Warframe around sound doesn't have good sound design. It pisses me off, honestly. But, you know, the trailer itself gives her a really nice sound design, and that is really nice. Great. So, wave of energy every 3 seconds, dealing blast damage and adding a blast proc to the enemy. Enemies hit are pushed away from Banshee by 2 meters with scales with range. The damage is 1000 per wave at base, range is 20 meters, and Banshee is still immobile while casting this ability, meaning that if you cast this ability, you have to stay on the spot and keep holding onto the ground to keep doing the quakes. Augment, Resonating Quake. Banshee throws a second wave right after the first one. Banshee throws a second wave right after each one, dealing 50% of the original wave's damage. Kills with Soundquake give 60 overguards to Banshee with scales with strength. So, a Soundquake build would probably require 3 augments. The second ability augment, the third ability augment, and the fourth ability augment. But at the same time, if you have these and you just add strength and nothing else, these automatically make the build incredibly broken. Because you get a headshot kill because your fourth ability targets headshot normally, and then sonar activates immediately, giving you crazy damage, slowing the enemies, then making the enemies less accurate so they hit you for less, and then making the enemies suffer this small CC of pushing them away by 2 meters, and then retract happens, where it retracts the wave, dealing 100% of its damage with scales with strength, by the way. So this means that if we have 300% strength, the wave coming back deals 300% of its damage. And then it adds another guaranteed proc, and the enemies are now pulled to Banshee by 2 meters with scales with range and knocked down. So yes, if you want to build for Soundquake, and if you want to make Soundquake good, maybe even overpowered, you would be able to do that with this. And if you don't want to do that and you just want to do a version of Banshee that is focused around weapons, you can do that by subsuming Soundquake. And that makes Banshee a good DPS, support, casting frame, whatever you want it to be. She can even kind of tank now because she has a lot of ways to absolutely does damage by giving the enemies less accuracy that stacks up to 70%, giving herself shields by retracting abilities, giving herself overguard if she ever uses her fourth ability, stunning the enemies with first ability, giving silence to the enemies affected by their second abilities that are also affected by the fucking inaccuracy. Everything is crazy. Everything here would make Banshee a really cool utility frame that can have a lot of tools at her disposal. Would it be overpowered? Probably so, but as I said, I am not a game designer. I'm just giving ideas, and the numbers, if they needed to change, then they would obviously change after playtesting. Obviously, I cannot playtest any of this because I'm not a game designer, but let me know, guys, if you think any of these reworks are good ideas. I have a small melee influence thing that I'm gonna end with because it's kind of not finished, but I want more opinions from people talking about melee influence and all that at the comments. So I want to generate some discussion about the future of this game in general, the reworks that could potentially happen, and most importantly, what is a hot topic right now, which is how melee influence is probably gonna be nerfed since the arcane is completely overpowered in general, but specifically in exalted weapons, it's absolutely bonkers. So, before I end this video, melee influence, problematic beyond fixing. Absolutely zero interaction with gameplay. Adding an LOS check will only kill the arcane completely. So, let me emphasize on what I mean. So, let's get my Okina, which I know has melee influence. Currently, melee influence does not respect line of sight checks whatsoever. So if you hit one person and we proc it, please, thank you. Now everyone gets electricity damage, no matter if they're behind the wall, they're whatever, as long as they're close in the range of melee influence, they will get the damage. Now, what is the main issue to this? Well, the main issue to this is that first of all, it's a chance to happen on hits on an enemy affected by electricity, which is pretty common to happen if you just build for it, and then the damage will just go crazy. But the most important thing is that because there is no LOS checks, if we decide to hit this guy, with LOS checks, normally all of these guys almost would be unaffected. And if you had some guys behind walls or up there, those guys would be also unaffected because we have LOS checks. So adding LOS checks would basically nerf this arcane by 50 to 60%, which is absolutely tragic. So what you can do is first of all do this. You can either make the ability be, a guaranteed interaction, like you get a guaranteed proc of this arcane, but you get it every time you kill someone, not every time you hit someone. Which is a really good way to go about reworking it and making it still viable. Another way of making it viable as well is what I tried to do here, which is to kind of make it so that any type of damage you put onto the weapon, any type of element you put onto the weapon, is, it's transferred to electricity. So currently, on beasts, we have some specific mods for the claws, which are chilling claws. You see how it converts all elemental damage from these claws to cold damage, basically. So if we add, where's the electricity one? I have the electricity one here, that's perfect. So if I add flame gland, that will normally give me heat, but it doesn't. It gives me still electricity damage. So make it do the same thing, but then if you affect an enemy with electricity damage, you give him a blast proc. And if you actually kill him while the blast proc is onto him, then you spread the blast proc damage and the blast proc itself to all targets within 20 meters of the original. This would make it so that the arcane would still be nerfed, it would still be overpowered, and it would still have its purpose of being an AoE arcane for melee weapons that don't have any good AoE capabilities. So you can still just hit one target, hit him repeatedly, and then as long as you kill him before the blast proc runs out, you are good to go. So that is one way to go about it. And other ways to go about it would be to either nerf this a bit by doing the on kill command and then buffing every other arcane that exists. So if we have melee influence to trigger on kill only instead of on hits, then we buff the other arcanes to do other stuff, to either have more synergies, give us passives, anything like, let's say we give melee animosity that heavy attacks get crit chance and range, or that we get melee exposure that the combo duration is increased by like 5 seconds or whatever when the arcane is maxed, or something like that. You just gain extra stats on top of these arcanes to actually make them worthwhile using and make them a lot more worth and buff some of the frames that use them with the new exalted stuff. It could be something way healthier for the game than just having melee influence being absolutely top tier for every exalted weapon almost, and just having everything else in the map. So overall, that's kind of what I wanted to say. I am just predicting that D is gonna add an LOS check basically and absolutely kill the arcane, which is something that would make me incredibly sad because I don't want to see the arcane go completely. I think it's fine in the way it functions, but I think it's a bit overpowered on the part that it can trigger so easily. If you make it a bit harder to trigger the arcane, so it's not as common to actually get it, then the arcane would be way more balanced and it would be way better and healthier in the spots. But I think buffing the other arcanes could also be a good fix for the sake of it, but at the same time, the game is not tanky enough to, we don't have enough enemies in the game that can attack all this type of stuff, so I don't think it matters too much, and I think nerfing this and buffing the others is the best way to do it, but nerfing it in a way to kill its damage or its functionality is not the play in my opinion. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know how you feel about melee influence right now, how you feel about the other arcanes, and what you would do, what you think is the best thing. I'll gladly read all of your comments on this video because I think some of the comments will be absolute essays, and I really don't mind if they are. You can have an opinion on everything. I'll read it, I can discuss it, and I'll try to do my best to answer as many as possible. So, thank you very much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed it despite being so messed up and so long. Whatever, having it in the background, maybe giving your own opinions, thinking about it. Overall, I think some of these reworks would be great success for the game, and I really hope the hit is right on the money with the kind of announced Valkyr rework and some other reworks that I'm aware that are coming to the game. Once again, thank you for reaching the end, and I'll see you in the next video.